Discovering Alabama is a production of the Alabama Museum of Natural History.
This program is about a land unknown to many people, a land that in many ways has escaped the hustle and bustle of modern civilization, a place with bountiful backcountry, forests, streams, and wildlife more diverse than can be found in much of the inhabited world. Come along with me as we explore the natural wonders of this land. Come along as we discover Alabama.
Hello, I'm Doug Phillips. Welcome to Discovering Alabama. I'm going to wait a bit before telling you which part of the state we're visiting this time. In the meantime, just follow me. Tell you what, while we're enjoying our little walk through the woods on our way to a special surprise site for today's show, let's take a moment to see what aspects of natural history we might spy along the way. I've got something spotted already. Here we have a species of wild ginger called heartleaf because of the shape of the leaf, and these are pretty much throughout the moist woods areas. If you break the leaf and smell it, you can get that rich ginger aroma. Right down here is a very useful plant. This is jewelweed. It has a jewel-looking little bright orange bud on it. And the usefulness of this plant has to do with poison ivy. If you get poison ivy on you, break the stem, put a little juice right on where you got the poison ivy, and I guarantee you, in a day's time, that poison ivy will disappear. Here in this sunny sort of open area is another beautiful plant. This is the cardinal flower. Lobelia cardinalis is its scientific name. A bright red, beautiful flower. In fact, it's the only lobelia that's red in the southern Appalachians. The rest of the lobelias are blue or violet in shade, but this one sure is beautiful. Right next to it here is another nice plant. This is New York ironweed, sort of an aster type flower. Grows up to 9 feet tall. And when you see this one in bloom, you know it's not long before the goldenrods and the rest of the asters come on, because autumn is just around the corner. Two beautiful plants right here side by side. Smells a little bit like Vic salve. It's Pycnanthemum muticum. How about that? Otherwise known as mountain mint. And you can tell it because it's usually got whitish shade on top of the leaves, the upper leaves. And you can make a tea out of it, but it's a tough one to drink. It's a wild mint. Oh, and look at this. And this, as you might guess, is coral fungi of the Clavaria species. And as most fungi, it lives off of dead material in the deep woods. And this time of year, you can begin to see all sorts of fungi and mushrooms begin to appear throughout the woods. Well, as we get closer to our mystery location, maybe I better give you a hint or two. See if you can guess where we are. Here's your first clue. We're somewhere in the major physiographic region known as the Appalachian Highlands. Now that clue probably won't be of much help to you because the Appalachian Highlands is a major physiographic area covering a good portion of the state. Let me give you another clue. We're in a sub-region of the Appalachian Highlands known as the Valley and Ridge Province. You got it pinpointed now? How about this? We're in that portion of the Valley and Ridge Province known as Big Canoe Valley. Now, Big Canoe Valley is essentially a large valley formation, but it also contains several minor ridges. It begins around Gadsden and runs southwestward down through Birmingham, parallel to Red Mountain, and into the central part of the state. Attaboy, come on, bird. Yeah. We're proceeding along the southeastern ridge of the Big Canoe Valley. In fact, right now, we're walking along one of the first stagecoach routes in Alabama, the early 1800s roadway between Bucksville and Montevallo. If that doesn't clue you in, I'll tell you precisely where we are. We're at the juncture of Bibb, Tuscaloosa, and Jefferson counties. And as we top this ridge right up here and look down, you'll get a glimpse of some of the more recognizable features of our location. Now, if you haven't guessed where we are yet, the scene below ought to be a dead giveaway to those of you already familiar with this place. Nestled in the little pocket valley down there, which is known as Roop's Valley, are the more than 50 early Alabama buildings, hundreds of preserved artifacts, and a host of other special attractions that make up Tannehill Historical State Park. If you didn't guess where we are, it's probably because you've never entered Tannehill Park by the route that we just took. In fact, most of you probably remember your approach resembling something more like this. You see, in addition to the interesting natural history associated with this part of the state, Tannehill Park is also a popular gathering place for those who are interested in cultural history. Long lines of visitors are common for special events, such as the park's famous Heritage Days, held annually during October, and Trade Days, held on the third weekend of each month from March to December. These events and other special arts and craft shows provide opportunities for people from across the region to buy and sell or to do some good old-fashioned swapping for all kinds of things. Of course, sometimes the great fun and excitement of the special arts and crafts events can sort of overshadow the full-time role of the park as a showcase of history.
One of the things that was very important when you went to school back in the old days was your penmanship. They really cared more about the penmanship than about how you spelled the words. So, you had to practice penmanship on a slate. And your blackboard was made of slate. And we had two things that we practiced. We had a ovals. Whoops. Ovals. These are not very good ovals, are they? And push-pulls. Everybody wrote exactly
This is the
same
Fowler
way.
House. And what's going on inside right now is typical of probably what's the most important aspect of Tannehill Park. And that's its value as a learning resource, a place where history can come alive both for school children and for the rest of us. To learn more about how Tannehill Park is used as a learning resource, let's talk with Deborah Rust, the education specialist for a project that's being developed right now for Tannehill Park. Hey, Deb.
Hi, Doug.
What all y'all have going here at the park, educationally, that is?
Well, we have a program that we've developed and we think it's very exciting. We're planning to get school children from all areas to come out and go through our learning loops. We have 3 learning loops. One is the basic learning loop where they will go to the Cane Creek Schoolhouse, the Fowler Schoolhouse, the museum, and over to the furnace. The second one is a science loop where we plan to offer lessons in biology, geology, and do some nature studies and some ecology studies. And then the third loop will be our arts and crafts loop, where we hope they can go to the different log cabins and to the grist mill and just see how pioneers lived many years ago. We have a lot of qualified assistants who are working here. We have a furnace master who dresses in clothes of that period, even has a little pouch made out of animal hide, and he tells about the making of iron ore many years ago. He really makes the history come alive. Then we have a Confederate soldier who dresses in the uniform. He has guns on display and knives and bullets and even shoots the gun, and that's always quite exciting. He has his bayonets and his swords, and always has a lot of involvement and interaction from the children. As a learning resource, the park is available for teachers to come out and participate in these learning loops, or they could conduct their own lessons right out here by the stream. You could have an English class sit down and write poetry. You could have your science class study the stream ecology. There are just many different lessons that you can conduct in nature, and we hope the teachers will do that.
Of course, Tannehill Park is probably best known for its historic iron furnaces, which were used to supply the Confederate Army with everything from gun barrels to cannonballs during the Civil War. This ironworks history had its beginning in 1830, when a furnace master by the name of Daniel Hillman came to this part of Alabama to set up a forge to make pots, pans, and Dutch ovens. And in 1855, under the supervision of furnace iron master Moses Stroop, a new ironworking forge was built to include a charcoal blast furnace. Several years later, the Confederate government, under the direction of William Sanders, added 2 more furnaces, and the 3 furnaces together were known to produce up to 20 tons of pig iron and heavy military items per day. This main furnace was restored in the 70s and stands today as an important reminder of the remarkable role played by this area in early Alabama history. What makes it especially interesting is the geology. Not only did this area have plentiful iron ore, but also the limestone that was used for the flux to fire the furnace. Let's take a look at how it worked. As you've noticed, we're at the top of the furnace, and this is where the ore was put in. Came down the runways with a big load of it and dumped it right into the top of the furnace, where it collected on top of the charcoal in there that heated the ore. The best place to talk about the real inner workings, though, is down at the bottom of the furnace. Here we can see more of the inner workings of this furnace. Right up here is the real central part of it. In the chimney, as we just saw, the ore was poured in, and then there were layers of limestone and charcoal. There was a big bellows that operated right out here to force air into the furnace and keep the temperature up to 2,000 degrees. That melted the raw ore, which sifted through the flux, and it flowed right out here onto this sand floor, which was the molding area. And right here is where the molds were for everything from the cannonballs to the gun barrels. As might be expected, the original furnaces were heavily damaged when Union troops came through in March of 1865, a fact of history that I'm sure some would like to forget. Actually, there are other facts that may not be gratifying to remember, but are probably good to be aware of. For example, from a social standpoint, an unhappy aspect of Tannehill history is that the Confederates used over 600 slaves to keep the iron making in full swing during the war. In fact, there remains today an old slave cemetery where experts claim that many slaves were buried without a coffin, not even a pine box. From an environmental standpoint, another unpleasant fact is that the area was stripped for miles around of its normal hardwood forest in order to get the charcoal that was used to fire the blast furnace. In fact, some experts claim that the normal diversity of plant and animal life that was here in the Civil War days may never return to its full mix. Still, today, Tannehill Park is one of the finest historical attractions in the South. Completion of the 6-year development of the park was marked in 1976 when old Furnace No. 1 was refired as a state-sponsored bicentennial project, an event that attracted national attention and resulted in a run of about 1.5 tons of new pig iron to be cast into replica Confederate souvenirs. The park's widely acclaimed Iron and Steel Museum of Alabama, completed as recently as 1981, is a truly impressive repository of relics, machinery, and products of practically every aspect of early iron making.
This museum was built as a repository for the relics from the Alabama iron industry, specifically the Tannehill furnaces, which are about 300 yards from this location. This facility was built in 1981 through a special appropriation from the state legislature. Tannehill Park is a memorial to the Alabama iron industry, and as such, the legislature is interested in making sure that the iron industry is interpreted in the correct manner, and this museum is a support facility for that purpose. For example, a lot of this material behind me here, these relics, came from a dig that the University of Alabama did in 1956 under the direction of Tom DeJarnett. A lot of this has been found subsequently, and there are ongoing excavations here. Even as we speak, there are digs underway. All around the Tannehill furnace yards are pieces of old machinery. A lot of this was scrapped in the 20s and in World War II. Big pieces of machinery were scrapped, and I really wish we had those in this museum, but unfortunately we don't.
In addition to being home for so many unique items of early Alabama history, the 1,500 acres of Tannehill Park are also unique in their status as a state park. Instead of being under the jurisdiction of the State Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, as are most of Alabama's parks, because of its historical significance, Tannehill is under the supervision of the Tannehill Furnace and Foundry Commission, established by the state legislature in 1969. This commission, with the help and contributions of many agencies, organizations, and individuals, has overseen the continued enrichment of the park as an historical and recreational asset for the state. The park now contains an array of restored buildings and replicas that represent almost every aspect of pioneer life as it was in Alabama during the 1800s. Come on. Atta boy. Up there is the mill pond for John Wesley Hall's old cotton gin and grist mill. It was constructed in 1867. This is the original site for it. The water was dammed up and then redirected to turn the wheel on the grist mill. Inside John Wesley's mill is about as exciting as outside. Mother Nature provides the original power source, which is channeled out of the pond, down the flume. It rotates the big wheel outside, which in turn rotates the wheels inside, which in turn rotate the grist right over here. Tannehill unbolted water ground corn mill. This is what we call the old Pioneer Farm here at Tannehill Park. The first building that you saw was the old Williams home that was originally part of the James Williams farm on a 80-acre plot of land that was deeded to him, homestead deed, by President Grover Cleveland back in the 1890s. There are some additional buildings here. You see there's an old barn and a number of other buildings. There's an old smokehouse, corn crib, an old double pole barn from way back in the 1800s. And also on the site here is one of the first milk barns that ever stood in Alabama, built in 1823. And over here we see some other items. Some early implements from the 1800s. For example, here's the vestiges of some of the early horse-drawn buggies. And right across the road over here, we can find some of the penned-in wildlife that live on the farm. Have deer, and some turkeys, all right here for the visitor to view. Come on, come on, turkey. This is the Kimberly Methodist Church. It dates back to the turn of the century. It was moved here from an original site not far from Tannehill Park and located up here on a forested mountaintop. In fact, folks refer to it now as the Church in the Wildwood. Over in the corner is a piano that dates back to about the same period. The Kimberly Church was used by various traveling preachers that came through this part of the country, used the podium for their guest sermons. Inside the church is an old pump-type organ also. It's a real brilliant, beautiful piece of work with carvings and has a tone that'll take you back to yesteryear. This is the Charles Jefferson Stewart home. Original logs, as is the case with most of the buildings here at Tannehill. This particular building dates back to about 1850. It was brought here from somewhere not too far away. This is the old dog trot. Many of you recognize the dog trot. Mr. and Mrs. Stewart were reputed to be pretty hard workers, but they didn't work all the time. In fact, they raised 13 children right here in this building. Let's look inside. Well, I'm going to sit down for a second. We've been having a lot of fun looking at all the buildings here at Tannehill Park, other features. In order for all these things to get here and be in such good shape as they are, it takes a lot of work. I want to introduce to you the gentleman who's responsible for that. We all know people who are smarter than anybody with a PhD and got more common sense and work harder to boot. This gentleman fits that billing. Mr. Ed Nelson is superintendent of Tannehill State Park. Ed, I want you to tell me, what all goes into relocating all these buildings and making such a nice setup?
Well, it's a great labor of love, Doug. You observe the house in its natural setting before you make any moves on it. You determine how many logs are going to have to be replaced. You decide if you can save any of the boards, or usually they break and crack on you, and it's more trouble to try to salvage one. It costs so much. Being so careful that we normally will replace the boards on the houses with new lumber and stain it to try to blend it to the color of the actual logs. After we've observed this house properly, we number each log with its geographic location, east, west, north, south, such corners, and determine, again, at that time, we usually see another log or two that needs to be replaced. Everything looks not quite as good the second time, you know. So after this is done, our destruction crew, I guess we'd call it, go in and start removing the old shingles, the roof, strip it right down, and then we just load it right onto a vehicle. And as we get back to the park, we normally have a site already prepared, and we start laying it off just as rapidly as we took it down. We have many log buildings in the park. You've probably noticed we have 4 dog trot houses, and this is the one of them, the latest one. We received this house from the Stewart family, and it was located down in the National Forest in Bibb County, below Centerville. And we worked on it several days. The inside walls in this particular house were boarded over. The outside walls were boarded over. So we had to do a complete stripping operation to get it ready to take down. So there was a lot of labor involved in it. The stone that you see in the fireplaces are the original stones. Of course, we relocate them into different configurations, but the stone were brought in also.
When you come to Tannehill Park in person, you'll have the chance to visit your choice of historical sites, whether it be the Woodward Post Office, one of the earliest post offices in the area, the Collins House, currently home to an original papermaking operation, or the park's official memorial to the Confederacy and the Civil War period. And you'll have your choice of activities for rest and relaxation, including dining in the park's restaurant, known as the Furnace Master's Inn, camping at any one of the many pleasant campsites, observing the park's wildlife, or even a little train whistle thrills, a favorite for some folks we know.
Look yonder coming down that railroad track.
And after a full day of drinking in the historical charm of Tannehill Park, it's nice to find a place like this, the park's bubbling springs, and drink in a little refreshment. And when the day is done and it's time to leave, well, you know me and Turkey, we're just as apt to leave the same way we came in, through the wilds of Mother Nature. Only this time, I think we'll start on the Boy Scout hiking trail, which is an adventure in itself. Come on, Turk.
Hope you've enjoyed our trip back into early Alabama history. We hope also that being mindful of our history will help us better plan and prepare for Alabama's future, to retain the valuable aspects of our natural heritage and our Southern culture, so that Alabamians will be able to enjoy a lifestyle that blends the best of the old with the best of the new.
This production was funded in part by the Center for Environmental Research and Service at Troy State University.